Welcome to the shoujo rabbit hole, and I say welcome because I know most of my audience has maybe definitely not been down it before. Peach Girl, Super Pop Love Hurricane is a needlessly convoluted shoujo manga that isn't very good, but it's not that bad, and it's pretty entertaining, but it also isn't. It's been adapted 9 million times.
Toji's in the hospital with appendicitis. I think
And I have a favorite, and that's what we're here for today. Part 1. Context. The manga ran from 1997 to 2003, and there was an anime that came out in 2005, and then they very randomly made a live-action remake in 2017 for some reason. But there was also a 13-episode Taiwanese television adaptation in 2002, which will be our main topic shortly. No one understands this show like I do. It's cinema.
I told you not to trust him. I really think that guy's a sex fiend.
Just kidding, no it isn't. I've read the manga, I've watched the movie, I've watched the anime twice, I've watched the Taiwanese show thrice, for no particular reason, really. It's not very good, except it's also phenomenal. So, here we go. This show is about the dramatized trials and tribulations of our lead woman, Momo/Xiao, depending on the version. As a tall, tan, athletic girl in the late 90s/early 2000s Japan and or Taiwan, and the presumptions people make about her as a result, along with the evil and psychotic behavior of her quote-unquote friend, who wants what she has in her happiness at any cost. Sai/Shahui, the fake-ass friend of our protagonist Momo/Xiao, begins with petty things like telling Momo/Xiao a bag is ugly so she can buy it for herself, and escalates to violent crime and felonies by the end of the show. By chapter 5 of the manga, she falsely stages evidence and injury to accuse Momo of assault and battery.
Oh yes, makeup. I love it.
Later on, she attempts to murder the school nurse. The important characters in the story are Momo/Xiao, our protagonist, our tan diva, Sai/Shahui, who is evil, Toji/Dongxi, one of the male leads who is straight-laced but sort of stupid, and Kairi/Ali, the other and better male lead, who is not as straight-laced but very perceptive. Xiao knows Dongxi because they've been classmates for years, and knows Ali because he can't swim and she was a lifeguard. So some quick highlights, best moments from the manga, anime, movie. The dub of the anime has the voice actress for Sai as the woman who would go on to play female V in Cyberpunk 2077, so don't ever say this video isn't related to my other content. Shahui takes the Looney Tunes wild goose chase and lying through her teeth approach to much of the conflict, so even though it is soap opera shoujo levels of misunderstanding, it is slightly less frustrating because there's this Machiavellian figure orchestrating much of it, Kairi/Ali does not trust and does not listen to Sai from the very beginning, so he is by default more likable than gullible Toji/Dongxi in that regard. That man is devastatingly easy to trick. In almost every version of this story, Toji either is hit by a vehicle or is almost hit by one, sometimes more than once. In the anime, Momo has the cutest bathroom ever. I say this as a person who's big on bathroom interior design, top 10 anime bathrooms. Part 2, my favorite. The Taiwanese 2002 adaptation opens slightly differently from every other version of this story. This show changes the setting to college, whereas every other version is in high school, and also everyone's names, but otherwise it is pretty faithful. Xiao still tries to jump out that hospital window, so don't worry. She isn't even very tan in this version, but it's admittedly hard to tell because it does not exist anywhere on the internet with a resolution greater than 240p. It is on Internet Archive, though, because it's an important piece of history. I seriously cannot find anywhere to watch this that isn't Internet Archive in the most 2002 resolution ever, with the watermarks of 4 piracy sites that have been shut down, or on YouTube split up into 1,000 parts, still in abysmal quality, still with double subtitles. The wiki for this show has a copy-paste marketing blurb instead of an actual summary, and when you go to the individual episodes, there's literally nothing there. This show has the most 2000s vibe ever. And And for the record, it is certainly not shot like a shoujo anime, that's for sure. It's shot like an art house indie horror film for some reason, at least 60% of the time. It also came out a year before the manga finished, so it had to freestyle the ending FMA style, and it is also very, very conspicuously sponsored by Pocari Sweat. The rest of the Taiwanese 2002 adaptation, aka I Tricked You, it's actually way deeper than you thought. Preface, I think translations have an ethical obligation to be as accurate as possible, while adaptations do not. If anything, I view the Taiwanese adaptation more favorably for doing its own thing, especially because the story has been adapted so many times, and I have seen every single version, although, like we mentioned, it kind of had no choice due to the manga being unfinished at the time. But we will be using the Taiwanese 2002 adaptation as our primary example for the rest of this video. The reason the Taiwanese 2002 adaptation is a definitive version to me is because it's the most extensive version with real people in it, therefore gives us the most points of reference in terms of displayed gender cues. You'll see why that's important in a minute. But also largely in part due to Shaohui's performance / portrayal. It's the most grounded and believable version of her character, and consequently functions better as a point of reference in real-world gender presentation. She puts on the most convincing performance by far, and the visible shifts in her body language will help make my point here. Plus, it's got way more sauce than any other version of this story. Check the creepy-ass Mickey plushies. Why did this thing get adapted so many times anyway? It's a pretty basic premise and setting, for all intents and purposes. But what's setting it apart here is the way it entertains its themes. I don't want to say explores, because that's not really exactly true. It mentions its themes reoccurringly without ever delving into how or why. But anyway, it entertains themes of being judged based on appearances and the government black ops level operations female bullies run on their victims, which are themes that are deeply resonant with people. Personally, I don't think Peach Girl is good in any kind of objective measurement. Not that objective art criticism exists, but I think most people will find it to be somewhere in the range of somewhat entertaining to generally mediocre. I like it because it's insane and off the rails, yes, but also because I've had the experience of having someone unfairly come to a conclusion about me and dealt with two-faced people, much like everyone else. Honestly, Peach Girl isn't quite off the rails enough to be really trashy TV train wreck levels of entertaining. It's teetering on the rails, but miraculously somehow staying on, which honestly puts it in this weird spot of being just frustrating at times, because it's not actually that good, but it's not bad enough to be outright funny, and therefore loses entertainment value despite not actually being as bad as it could be, which is weird. But back to my point. What compels us to retell the story of a girl who transgresses against standard femininity in the most minuscule of ways? Most of feminine gender performance is walking on a tightrope. Leaning too far in either direction is considered wrong in some fashion. While the exact position of that tightrope varies, American versus Taiwan versus Japan, the principal balancing act remains the same. A large part of Peach Girl's message consists of assuring Momo that she is still a nice feminine girl despite a height and a tan only slightly more pronounced than average. That said, women get criticized for literally any version of femininity that they perform, whether it's either unattractive or problematic or both or unfeminist or too feminist. There is no correct way to be a woman, and we all know this thanks to the Barbie movie bravely breaking new ground and telling us all this new information that we definitely did not already know. I'm more than a little burnt out on the what is the most ethical way to perform femininity discourse. There's no such thing. Just be yourself. Do whatever you want. But I think a lot of women and girls find the idea that they are one slip up away from quote-unquote failing at femininity kind of relatable in some capacity, even if they've never seriously entertained the thought. Peach Girl openly acknowledges the ways in which someone who is a cisgender woman and was socialized as such could somehow ironically fail at womanhood because of some arbitrary standard. The thing that Peach Girl gets so close to but repeatedly passes by is the underlying idea that gender performance is often reactionary. Now, before we get too much into that idea, I'd like to establish the concept of gender as performance for the members of the audience unfamiliar, so yes, I will be quoting Judith Butler. Gender is in no way a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts proceed. Rather, it is an identity tenuously constituted in time, an identity instituted through a stylized repetition of acts. Further, gender is instituted through the stylization of the body, and hence must be understood as the mundane way in which bodily gestures, movements, and enactments of various kinds constitute the illusion of an abiding gendered self. Butler also later adds that performing one's gender wrong initiates a set of punishments both obvious and indirect, and performing it well provides the reassurance that there is an essentialism of gender identity after all. Viewing gender as a stylized repetition of acts and the idea that performing it incorrectly leads to social consequence are the important takeaways here. In this context, Sai/Shahui then represents performing gender in the most correct way within her environment in each adaptation, while Momo/Zhao Tao represents deviance. Shahui is petite, thin, pale, demure, coquettish, fragile, and polite. Zhao Tao is assertive, tall, tan, muscular, and tough. But Zhao Tao is always upset about her perceived transgressive femininity, and the narrative repeatedly goes out of its way to assure the audience that these things are out of her control. Her height, her tan, they're not her fault. We have to be extra sure you know that Momo would never defy gender norms on purpose. Even in episode 1, when her skirt is short, generous, and the other girls make comments on it, it's only that short because it got caught in the door of the cab and ripped. The way she dressed last night could have scared someone half to death. What is she, a slut? But she is still harshly punished, primarily by the other women in the story, for her lack of conformity. Zhao Tao experiences the punitive reaction Butler describes from her own gender group, even though her deviance is not drastic. To quote a very insightful YouTube commenter on the second episode, "I don't understand why Zhao Tao is so self-conscious about her body. She ain't working with no dangerous curves or nothing." Word.
With one hand, he was able to hold onto these broad ex-swimmer shoulders of mine.
These lines are funny because reality does not match up with the characters' perceptions of themselves. Fundamentally, Zhao Tao is still quite thin and not that built, and she acts like she looks like a linebacker. In whatever cultural context or environment women are in, there often exists a pressure to be smaller, daintier, softer than their male counterparts. Zhao Tao's skin tone and height would or could essentially be a non-issue in another environment, but they matter greatly in a context that values paleness and smallness in relation to femininity. For example, if the environment in question is made up of writers and poets, a demographic of people typically less concerned with the physical strength and athleticism, and more inclined towards valuing intelligence and creativity, then the ultra-dainty femininity we see in these spaces as a response to this environment is in service of maintaining a gender binary. The men in this community are often less physically imposing, or at least less concerned with it, and in order to still feel feminine, the women sometimes lean further into the dainty, languishing by the window sent to the seaside to my health persona to maintain a relational gender performance gap. This then leads us to the idea that much of male and female gender presentation is relational. As in, women are not concerned with actually being physically small because small equals feminine, but instead feeling small relative to the male-presenting people around them. In a patriarchal system, when you start to look, you'll notice, depending on the manifestation of masculine gender expression in an environment, community, or lifestyle, in that the less hypermasculine but still generally gender conforming an environment is, the more overtly dainty female gender presentation becomes, like in the writer-poet community. Because I don't know why I keep saying writer-poet as if those two things are like mutually exclusive categories. Anyway. But this idea is still present in more hypermasculine environments where female gender presentation leans less into the dainty style we see in our coquette writer girls. Think the more assertive and athletic stereotype of a sorority girl relative to a fraternity boy compared to the coquette writer girl compared to the yearning male poet. These two representations of femininity are quite different, yet the gender dynamic relational to the men around them is maintained. We see the same thing in many shoujo stories that often feature more thin, pretty boy love interests and therefore feature even more dainty and at times docile female leads in response to maintain the relational gender gap between the two gender performances. Gender is then affirmed relationally to the gender performance occurring around you, which leads to my hottest take for this video, which is that cisgender people experience gender euphoria. Clock it. Do you actually like tall guys because you like hugging up? Or is it because feeling small in relation to a male partner is gender affirming? Ruminate on that. Hyper dainty femininity in academic spaces could also potentially be a response to the old rhetoric that intellectuality or academic pursuits of any kind made you less feminine. Betty Friedan repeatedly addresses the idea in The Feminine Mystique that if femininity had to be rigorously upheld and is easily destroyed by simple tasks like reading a book, then maybe it's not all that inherent. What is femininity if it can be destroyed by an education which makes the mind grow or induced by not letting the mind grow? I like this way of phrasing it because it emphasizes the fragility and impermanence of this type of concept of being feminine. And I mention this because while I still argue for relational gender performance, since this is the example I chose, I want to acknowledge this as potentially a factor. Women in academic spaces often felt the need to be more overtly or hyperfeminine because of the idea that academic pursuits could masculinize the mind. We don't think that way so much anymore, but historically the groundwork is in fact there. Now, femininity is reactionary because an excess is a negative thing, but so is a lack. Remember the tightrope. This is an obvious contradiction and a large part of why femininity can be so different across different spaces. Each woman moderates and changes expression constantly to avoid either extreme. What constitutes an excess and a lack can vary wildly between environments, so feminine presentation does too. The amount of mental effort tied to a constantly shifting goalpost of gender runs in the background of your mind like an app you forgot to close, sucking up power. Effortless conformity is demanded, but the very idea is oxymoronic. This, I believe, is the appeal of Peach Girl. There's a party going on some level, it acknowledges the fact that effortless conformity is a lie, and women can never fit perfectly into a gender standard through no fault of their own. Zhao Tao cannot help that she is tall or that she tans easily. These things are natural to her, and yet they are somehow subversive or challenging to what it means to be feminine. She works very hard to conform and fails. Despite this, Zhao Tao possesses other internal characteristics that are associated with femaleness, like empathy, kindness, chastity, emotionality, and altruism. Shahui is conversely selfish, cruel, manipulative, vain, and egocentric. The character traits each girl possesses are incongruent with their external compliances with feminine standards. In this way, Shahui uses a sort of weaponized malicious compliance with femininity in order to get what she wants. She bargains with her external displays of femininity and femaleness in order to get others to assume the positive, quote-unquote, feminine personality traits that she does not possess in correlation. Her smallness and daintiness are a calculated strategy to trick her peers into inferring virtue. This entire thing makes me think of that Verily Bitchy video that has the Miss Honey gender spectrum, in which a straight leg jean paired with a sensible blazer with your hair down is the peak and center of acceptable femininity. The only way to perform femininity without getting accused of something is to look like an H&M manager. For all this story's flaws, it does land pretty firmly on the sentiment that ridiculing someone for not fitting social and gender expectations perfectly is unjustified and ridiculous. Zhao Tao is punished for her differences but rewarded for her strength of character. There's something to be said for the presentation of masculinity in the story as well. Dongxi is more traditionally masculine out of the two leads, and yet he is the one that doesn't succeed romantically. He plays sports with balls and is more physically aggressive and less openly emotional than Ali, but his masculine conformity does not serve him, although when he gets that haircut he does hit the JYP uncanny valley. Ali has longer hair and a few distinctly feminine-coded behaviors. He still largely conforms to standards of masculinity, much like Zhao Tao still largely conforms to standard femininity, But in the end, the two most gender non-conforming characters are rewarded. But to be clear, the last thing I want for you to think is that anyone in this show is doing hashtag optimal gender, because they're not. This is a case study. Anyway, thanks for watching, especially if you're part of my 80% male demographic, because I know this video was not necessarily relatable to you, but I hope it may give you something to chew on when it comes to how we perceive gender expression. Word up. P.S. If you want some actually good Taiwanese rom-com, try Our Times, directed by Frankie Chen, or You Are the Apple of My Eye, directed by Giddens Co. They're not perfect, but they're fun, and have plots that make a fair bit amount more sense than Peach Girl 2002.